I mean, it was a sad flight back to Vegas. We get back to Vegas, and I had a home in Vegas, and I was going to get off and stay there, knowing my wife was in Louisiana. I said, no, no.
At 8. What if I told you that one of the most important people in Elvis Presley's life has been keeping secrets for almost 50 years? What if I told you that the man who stood right beside the king of rock and roll during his final years is finally ready to talk about what he really saw? Today, we're diving deep into the story that legendary guitarist James Burton has been holding inside his heart since August 16, 1977. James Burton wasn't just any musician. He was Elvis's right-hand man, his musical soulmate, and the leader of the famous TCB Band. For 8 long years, from 1969 until that terrible day in 1977, James watched Elvis transform from a comeback king into something that broke his heart. And now, at 85 years old, James Burton is finally sharing the truth about those final years with Elvis Presley. Picture this. It's a hot August morning in 1977. James Burton and the TCB Band are getting ready to fly from Los Angeles to Maine for what would have been another Elvis concert tour. The band is excited, the equipment is loaded, and everyone is talking about the shows ahead. But something feels different this time. Something feels wrong. James remembers looking out the airplane window as they flew toward Las Vegas to pick up Elvis. His guitar case was in his hands, the same pink Paisley Telecaster that Elvis loved so much. The same guitar that had brought joy to millions of fans around the world. But James had a terrible feeling in his stomach that he couldn't shake. They landed in Vegas, but Elvis never showed up at the plane. The band waited and waited. Nobody knew what was happening. Finally, they decided to refuel in Colorado and head back to Vegas. That's when James Burton's entire world fell apart. That's when they heard the news that would change everything forever. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was dead. But here's what most people don't know about that horrible day. Here's what James Burton has been carrying in his heart for all these years. The man who played guitar beside Elvis for 8 years saw things that the public never knew about. He watched his friend slowly disappear before his eyes. Let's go back to the beginning of their story. In 1968, Elvis asked James Burton to play on his comeback TV special. This was supposed to be Elvis's big return to music after years of making movies. But James had to say no. He was in a recording session with Frank Sinatra and couldn't get away. Can you imagine how different things might have been if James had said yes? But Elvis didn't give up. In 1969, the king came back to James with another offer. This time, it was for something much bigger. Elvis wanted James to put together a whole new band for his groundbreaking shows at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Elvis wanted James to be the leader of this band. He wanted James to help him reclaim his throne as the king of rock and roll. James Burton said yes, and it changed both of their lives forever. When James walked into that first rehearsal with his pink Paisley Telecaster guitar, Elvis's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Elvis loved that guitar so much that it became a part of his stage show. Night after night, Elvis would introduce James Burton to the audience, and the crowd would go wild. They knew they were watching something special. Those early Vegas years were magical. Elvis was back, and he was better than ever. James Burton and the TCB Band helped Elvis create some of the most powerful live performances in music history. Elvis was singing with passion again. He was moving like the young man who had taken the world by storm in the 1950s. Everything seemed perfect. But James Burton saw what the fans couldn't see. He saw what was happening behind the scenes. And it broke his heart. As the years went on, James watched Elvis change. The man who used to joke around during rehearsals became quiet and distant. The man who used to eat dinner with the band started eating alone in his room. The man who used to stay up all night talking about music started disappearing for hours at a time. James knew that Elvis was struggling with prescription drugs. Everyone around Elvis knew it. But back in the 1970s, nobody talked about addiction the way we do today. Nobody knew how to help someone like Elvis who seemed to have everything but was slowly losing himself. James Burton remembers nights when Elvis would come on stage and seemed like he was somewhere else completely. His voice was still beautiful, but his eyes looked empty. Sometimes Elvis would forget the words to songs he had sung thousands of times. Sometimes he would ramble between songs, talking to the audience about things that didn't make sense. But here's what James Burton wants people to understand. Even on his worst nights, Elvis Presley was still the most talented performer James had ever seen. Even when Elvis was struggling, even when he was fighting his demons, he could still make a room full of thousands of people feel like he was singing just to them. James watched Elvis battle his weight, his health, and his addiction. He watched Elvis try to get clean, only to fall back into old habits. He watched the man he considered a brother slowly disappear, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The hardest part for James wasn't watching Elvis struggle on stage. The hardest part was watching Elvis struggle with being Elvis. The man who gave the world so much joy seemed to have very little joy left for himself. Elvis was trapped by his own success. He couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed by fans. He couldn't have a normal relationship. He couldn't even go to a grocery store or a movie theater like a regular person. The fame that had made him the king of rock and roll had also made him a prisoner. James Burton saw how lonely Elvis was. Even when he was surrounded by people, even when he was on stage in front of thousands of screaming fans, Elvis seemed lonely. He had everything that most people dream of, but he didn't have the one thing that everyone needs: peace. In those final months of 1977, James noticed that Elvis was getting worse. The man who used to be full of energy could barely make it through a show. Elvis was gaining weight rapidly. His breathing was heavy. His movements were slow. But Elvis kept performing because that's all he knew how to do. James Burton tried to talk to Elvis about slowing down, about taking better care of himself. But Elvis wouldn't listen. He had commitments, he said. He had fans who were counting on him. He couldn't let people down. Looking back now, James Burton realizes that Elvis was saying goodbye in his own way. During those final concerts, Elvis would often stop and look directly at James while they were playing. It was like Elvis was trying to tell him something without saying the words. Then came that terrible August morning. James Burton was getting ready for what should have been another tour with his friend. Instead, he got the phone call that changed everything. Elvis Presley was gone. James Burton and his wife Louise immediately flew to Memphis to be with Elvis's father, Vernon. James will never forget walking into Graceland and seeing Vernon Presley's broken heart. The man had just lost his son, and there was nothing anyone could do to bring Elvis back. For 3 days, James Burton helped carry his friend's coffin. For 3 days, he watched the world say goodbye to the king of rock and roll. And for 3 days, he wondered if there was anything he could have done differently. The funeral was one of the hardest things James Burton ever experienced. Seeing Elvis in that coffin, seeing the man who had brought so much music to the world lying so still and quiet, was almost unbearable. James kept expecting Elvis to sit up and start singing, to tell everyone it was all just a big joke. But it wasn't a joke. Elvis Presley, the man who had changed music forever, was really gone. In the years since Elvis's death, James Burton has been asked thousands of times about what really happened. People want to know if Elvis's death could have been prevented. People want to know if the people around Elvis did enough to help him. People want someone to blame. But James Burton doesn't want to point fingers. He doesn't want to make anyone feel guilty. What James Burton wants people to understand is that Elvis Presley was a human being. He was a man with feelings and problems and struggles, just like everyone else. The only difference was that Elvis had to live his struggles in front of the whole world. James Burton believes that Elvis died from a broken heart as much as anything else. The prescription drugs certainly played a role, but James thinks that Elvis was tired of fighting, tired of being lonely, tired of being trapped by his own fame. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, but James Burton knows the real story is much more complicated. Elvis had been struggling for years with health problems that were made worse by his drug use. His body finally just couldn't take it anymore. What makes James Burton angry is when people say that Elvis was just a drug addict who threw his life away. That's not the Elvis that James knew. The Elvis that James knew was a generous, kind, talented man who was struggling with problems that most people couldn't even imagine. Elvis gave away cars to strangers. He paid for people's medical bills when they couldn't afford them. He sent money to families who were going through hard times. Even when Elvis was at his lowest point, he was still trying to help other people. James Burton wants people to remember the good things about Elvis. He wants people to remember the music, the performances, the joy that Elvis brought to millions of people around the world. He wants people to remember that Elvis Presley changed music forever. But James Burton also wants people to learn from Elvis's story. He wants people to understand that fame and money don't solve all of your problems. He wants people to know that addiction can happen to anyone, even someone who seems to have everything. Most importantly, James Burton wants people to know that it's okay to ask for help. Elvis was surrounded by people, but he was still suffering in silence. If Elvis had lived today, with all the resources we have for treating addiction and mental health problems, things might have been different. At 85 years old, James Burton has had almost 50 years to think about his time with Elvis. He has had 50 years to process the grief, the guilt, and the wonderful memories. And here's what he wants everyone to know. Elvis Presley was the greatest performer who ever lived, and he was also a man who deserved better than the hand life dealt him. James Burton still plays that Pink Paisley Telecaster sometimes. When he picks it up, he can still hear Elvis's voice calling out to the audience. He can still feel the energy of those amazing Vegas shows. He can still remember what it felt like to be part of something magical. But he also remembers the sadness in Elvis's eyes during those final months. He remembers the weight that Elvis carried on his shoulders every single day. And he remembers wishing that he could have done something more to help his friend. The truth that James Burton wants the world to know is simple. Elvis Presley was human. He was a man who gave everything he had to his music and his fans. He was a man who struggled with demons that eventually became too much to handle. And he was a man who deserved to be remembered for the joy he brought to the world, not just for the way his story ended. James Burton has spent almost 50 years protecting Elvis's memory. He has spent almost 50 years refusing to tell gossip or spread rumors. But now, at 85, he's ready to share the truth. Not to hurt anyone or to make money, but to help people understand the real Elvis Presley. The Elvis Presley that James Burton knew was complicated. He was generous and selfish, confident and insecure, strong and fragile, all at the same time. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had been famous since he was a teenager and had never had a chance to live a normal life. If Elvis were alive today, James Burton believes he would want people to remember him for his music. Elvis would want people to listen to That's All Right and remember the young man who changed everything. He would want people to watch his 1968 comeback special and see the passion in his eyes. He would want people to listen to Suspicious Minds and feel the power in his voice. But Elvis would also want people to learn from his mistakes. He would want people to know that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to ask for help. He would want people to know that addiction is a disease, not a choice, and that anyone can fall victim to it. As James Burton looks back on his 8 years with Elvis, he doesn't regret a single moment. Yes, it was painful to watch his friends struggle. Yes, it was heartbreaking to lose Elvis so young. But James Burton was part of something special. He was part of the greatest live rock and roll show in history. Every night when James Burton walked on stage with Elvis, he knew he was witnessing something that would never happen again. Every night when Elvis introduced him to the crowd, James felt the love that existed between Elvis and his fans. It was real, and it was powerful, and it was beautiful. That's what James Burton wants people to remember. Not the tabloid stories or the conspiracy theories or the gossip. James Burton wants people to remember the music, the performances, and the man who gave everything he had to make other people happy. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, but his music lives on forever. And James Burton, at 85 years old, is proud to have been a part of that legacy. He is proud to have called Elvis Presley his friend, and is grateful that he got to witness the magic up close. So there you have it. The story that James Burton has been carrying in his heart for almost 50 years. It's not the shocking scandal that some people might have been expecting. It's something much more important. It's the truth about a man who was both larger than life and heartbreakingly human. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please hit that like button and let us know in the comments below. Share this video with your friends and family who love Elvis Presley's music. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story about the legends of music history. Thanks for watching, and remember, the king of rock and roll lives on through his music and the memories of people like James Burton who were there to witness the magic.